Hey everybody, this is Angel. You're watching ASMR Angel Reads. I know I said last time I'd be out a week, maybe two, because of my tick bite. It's been a little over a week. I tried calling my regular doctor because the clinic said they wouldn't do anything for me for 4 to 6 weeks. But I called my doctor and they don't have anything open till late October, which is like 6 weeks anyway. So I'll just go back to the clinic to get my blood drawn at the end of October. We are continuing with Daggerspell Chapter 5. We're going to do Chapter 5, Section 2. I can only briefly summarize Chapter 5, Section 1 because it's been a while and I have memory issues, so I can't really remember all the details. I just know Jill and Cullen went on a caravan to trade with the West folk, who are elves, and most of the world thinks elves are a fairy tale. They trade iron goods for the West folks' horses because I guess their horses are really good. And then when they were leaving that area, it was found that there was going to be an ambush ahead, so they went to an abandoned castle to hold up and protect themselves, and they sent Jill out to find help, and she found Rodri and his army doing exercises out on the street, or in the road. It's not a street, in the road. So she asked them to come with her to help them out, and they went with her, and they got rid of the bandits, who weren't really bandits. They were vassals in other lords' castles, because I think there's going to be a civil war coming soon. So I think that's all that happened. So now I'll read Chapter 5, Section 2.
Hey, we got it. He hasn't worked.
So anyway, here we go. Chapter 5, Section 2, Daggerspell. All morning the Tyrann's loyal men mustered at Duncanabane, that's Rodri's castle. Following Sliggin's orders, they had ridden fast, leaving their provision carts to follow at their own slow pace, under the guard of the common-born spearmen that their various towns owed them in time of war. Nevin sat off to one side of the great hall and kept an eye on Lovian as she greeted the first Lord Oled, then Paradir, then Domir, and finally Manadid, who was captain of the war bands stationed at Dungwerberin. At last over 200 men were crowded into the great hall. Lovian was taking the strain well, greeting each leader calmly. The only emotion she allowed herself was the occasional outburst of a wrath of the rebel Corbin, a wrath that was fit for a Tyrant. About an hour before noon, Sliggin rose to his feet and announced that they had enough men to set out. The lads from farther away will ride in tomorrow, Sliggin announced to all and sundry. But we can't wait, eh? When the lords nodded their agreement, Nevin could see tension on their faces. Just how many of those vassals would indeed arrive, and how many would go to the rebels? Only the final count of muster would answer that question. Lovian named Sliggin Cadverdock until the army could meet up with Rodri. In a bustle of talk and a jingle of mail, lords and warbands alike got up and began filing out of the hall. In the confusion, Nevin hurried to Lovian's side. She led him back to the hearth for a few private words. Does Rodri still live? He does. Adern contacted me not but an hour ago. There's no sign of trouble so far today. With this army coming, it would behoove Corbin to withdraw to a safer territory. No doubt Lottelaine will advise his lord to do so. Lottelaine's the rogue elf. After so many years of hearing him talk of Dwemer, Lovian took this news calmly. Nevin himself, however, was seriously concerned about the depths of the evil into which Lottelaine had fallen. "Which would you rather have me to, stay with you or ride with the army?" "Ride, of course, and not just for the sake of my feelings. I keep remembering what you said to me the first time we met when Rodri had that terrible congestion of the lungs. Rodri's weird as Eldid's weird, you told me?" Lovian paused, watching Armin swagger out the door. "I love Eldid even more than my son. Keep him safe for her." Although the army was traveling light, there were pack horses in the rear carrying a few days' provisions to ride it over until the carts caught up. Since, as far as anyone knew, Nevin was an herb man and nothing more, he rode in the rear as well, with his pack mule behind him. Okay, my husband and son are yakking about computers, so you'll probably hear that in the background. Anyway, up at the head of the line, Sliggins set a fast pace, alternating walking and trotting. Although with their late start they would never reach Rodri by nightfall, Sliggin intended to get to him as early as possible on the morrow. Nevin was glad of the speed for his own private reasons. Adern, of course, had told him who was waiting at the ruined dun. Soon, if all went well, just on the morrow, he would at last see his Bragawin again. "I wish we could cremate him," Jenitar said in a thin, flat voice. Jenitar's elf with the caravan. "But there's no wood and there's no sacred oil." "A grave will do," Calandril said. He's also an elf. "He's dead, my friend. It won't matter one cursed jot to him what we do with his flesh." Jenitar nodded in miserable agreement and went on digging Alberyl's grave. Alberyl was an elf as well, and they burned their dead typically. Jill kept an eye on him as the two men of the West folk worked, sweating in the hot sun as the narrow trench grew deeper and deeper. The night before, Jenitar had been so hysterical with grief that Adern had given him a strong draught of sleeping potion. Now he seemed merely light-headed and a little sick, like a man who had drunk too much mead the night before. At last they were done. They threw the shovels to one side and picked up Alberyl's body, wrapped in a blanket, and laid him in. For a moment all three of them stood in respect and silence for the dead. All at once Jenitar tossed back his head and howled in rage. Before either Jill or Calandrel could stop him, he drew his knife and made a shallow gash on his forearm. "Vengeance!" he screamed. "I'll have blood to match mine for this." Jenitar held his arm over the grave and let the blood drip, spattering the blanket. "I witness your vow," Calandril said softly. Jenitar nodded and let the blood run. Suddenly Jill saw that, or thought she saw, Alberyl's shade, a pale blue flickering form, something just barely visible in the sunlight. She was afraid she would choke, afraid she was going daft. Jenitar howled out a wordless cry, then ran blindly away, crashing into the thickest of trees far downstream. The shade, if indeed it had ever been there, was gone. "We'd best leave him alone with his grief," Calandril said. "I'll fill this in. I'll help." Jill took a shovel gladly. She wanted to forget what she might have just seen. When they were finished, they went back to the dun and found an open spot by the back wall where Calandril could work at straightening the arrows he'd salvaged from the battlefield. The West folk had special tool for that, and the shoulder blade of the deer pierced with a hole just the diameter of the shaft. "We didn't bring a lot of arrows with us," he remarked. "I never dreamt we'd be riding into the middle of a war. Are there any good Fletchers in this part of the world?" "I wouldn't know. I've never shot a bow myself." Calandril frowned down at the mangled fletching on the arrow in his hand. His eyes were deep purple, as rich and dark as bardic velvet. "I might as well cut them off, curse it. I've left the proper knife in my gear." "Borrow this." Jill threw her silver dagger. "It's about as sharp as you'll find." He whistled under his breath and took the dagger from her. When he ran one finger down the flat of the blade, the weapon glowed with a light strong enough to be visible even in the daylight. Dwarven silver, he said. You don't see a lot of this around, do you? What did you call it? Dwarven silver. Isn't that what it is? Where did you get this anyway? From a smith named Otho on the Devery border. And this Otho, was he a short man? He gave her a sly grin, but stocky for all his lack of height. He was. Don't tell me you know him. Not him truly, but his people. Jill was too puzzled by the way the dagger was behaving to wonder about Otho's clan. She took it and turned it this way and that to watch the light playing on the surface. In her hands it was much dimmer. I've never seen it glow like this. It's because of me Otho's folks don't care for the likes of me. They like to know when one of us is around because they think we're a pack of thieves. Jill looked up sharply. Elsion Lacour, she whispered. Elves. Call us what you like, he said with a laugh, but we've been given those names before, true enough. One at a time, like the slow raindrops falling into the still pond, wild folk manifested around him. A blue sprite, 2 warty gnomes, the thick shimmer of air that meant a sliff as if they were hounds come to lie at their master's feet. And what's the true name of your people then? Oh, now that's someone I'll never tell you. You have to earn the right to hear the name of all your folks. Addern's the only one who has. Calendril smiled, taking the insult from his words. Now I've heard some of the tales you folk tell about us. We're not thieves and we're not demons from hell or closer to the gods than you are either, but simply flesh and blood like you. Old Addern tells me that our gods fashioned us from the wild folk, just like your gods fashioned you from animals. And so here we are, together on the earth for good or ill. Here, our priests say that the gods made us from earth and water. The Dwemer knows a fair bit more than the priests. Remember that as well. May I have the borrowing of the dagger again? I've got this wretched lot of work to do. Jill handed it back. For a long time she sat and watched it glow like fire in his hands, while she wondered over the strange things he'd told her. Toward noon, Jill saw a great silver owl circle the broch and disappear inside, a sight that made her shudder. She ran after it and found Cullen and Rodri talking together at the foot of the stairs. In a few minutes, Addern came down, swinging his arms and flexing his shoulders like a man who just swum a very long way in a strong sea. I found them, my lord. They're staying in a camp about 15 miles to the northeast. Well and good then, Roger said. We might as well ride out and meet Sligan. That might be unwise, my lord, Cullen broke in. They won't risk besieging the Dun with an army coming at their back, but they might make a desperate ride to catch you if you were out in the open. And how will they know if we, oh, by every god and his wife, what a dolt I am. Of course they'll know. You know, Silver Dagger, Addern went on, I'd take it most kindly if you stuck close to Lord Rodri when things come to battle. You know, Silver Dagger, Addern went on, I'd take it most kindly if you struck close to Lord Rodri when things come to battle. If the rebels are going to succeed, they have to kill him before they cause too much damage that Gerbert Rice is forced to intervene. No doubt, that's why they're not attacking Sligan's army. They can't risk killing the noble-born unless Rodri's there as a prize. Just that, Cullen said. Here, I thought you said you didn't understand matters of war. Sounds to me like you were being modest. Oh, I'm just repeating what Nevin told me. Rodri and Cullen nodded thoughtfully at this meaningless remark. Addern, I don't understand, Jill broke in. You said that no one told you? Oh, the old man chuckled under his breath. My apologies, child. I have a friend named Nevin. His father gave him that same name as a bitter jest, if I remember rightly. Since Otho the smith was very much on her mind, Jill suddenly remembered his riddle, that someday no one would tell her what craft to follow. If he were a friend of Addern's, this no one, he had to be a Dwemer man too. While the men went on talking of the coming war, Jill slipped away and ran out of the dun. By the stream that ran behind it, she sat down and watched the water sparkling with wild folk, who raised themselves up like waves to greet her. For For a moment she couldn't breathe. The Dwemer seemed to have swooped out of the sky like a falcon and had her in its claws. The waiting got on everyone's nerves as the hot summer day dragged on. With nothing but stream water to drink and a meager stale provisions from Dragged's stores to eat, the warband was in a sullen mood. While the merchant and his muleteers crept around in numb panic, everywhere Rodri walked he heard the men talking of Dwemer, and he could no longer cheerily dismiss their fears. Finally he went down to the gates, newly barricaded with big logs, and found Cullen there, leaning meditatively against the barricade on folded arms and watching the ravens wheel over the dead horse out in the meadow. Rodri joined him. At least old Dragged had shovels with him. Enemies or not, it would have ached my heart to have to leave those men unburied. That's most honorable of you, my lord. Ah, it is but my duty. I've been thinking about what old Adern asked you about sticking close to me in the scraps, I mean. They're going to be riding to mob me, sure enough, and I'd never ask a man to put himself in that kind of danger. Ride where you will on the field. Then I'll ride next to you. When Rodri swung around to look at him, Colin gave him an easy smile. My word will come when it comes, Colin said. It grips my heart to think of a decent man like you being killed for a handful of coin. What are those lords, silver daggers? Well, my thanks, truly my thanks. I'm honored that a man like you would think so highly of me. A man like me, my lord. Colin touched the hilt of his silver dagger as if to remind Rodri of his shame. Ah, by the hells, what do I care what you did 20 years ago or whatever it was? You've ridden through more rough scrapes than a lord like me ever hears about. Well, maybe, my lord, but In the ward behind them, yells exploded, jeers and curses and ill-natured taunts from the warband. Over it all, like a shriek of a raven, floated Jill's voice, shrill with rage. Oh, ye gods, Cullen turned on his heel and ran. Rodri was right behind him as they came round the side of the broch. They saw half the warband gathered round Jill, who yelled foul insults back as fast as they yelled them at her. Cannerid came running from the other direction and elbowed himself into the mob, pulling or slapping his men away impartially like a hunter slapping the dogs off a kill. Now what's all this, you young swine? Cannerid snarled. I'll put strips on your back if you've been doing the wrong thing to this lass. It isn't that at all, Jill was shaking in fury. They've been saying I don't have the right to carry a sword. Just let one of those little bastards try to take it away from me. When the warband surged forward, Rodri shoved his way through the pack, which fell back at the sight of him. My apologies, fair maid, Rodri made her a bow. I don't want any cursed apology, Jill snarled, adding a my lord as an afterthought. I meant what I said. Just let one of them try to take it away. A challenge, I mean. Come on, you bastards. I'll take any of one of you on with my bare hands if you have the balls to face me. Rodri was struck speechless. When he turned to Cullen, he found the silver dagger his usual impassive self. My lord, over the years I've learned it best to let Jill settle these things in her own way. What? Rodri and Cannerid spoke together. She'll get hurt. If I thought that, Cullen said levelly, I'd have my sword out and swinging right now. I've seen this kind of scrap 100 times, my lord, and I'll wager Jill wins handily. Done then, Rodri said. 1 silver piece gets you 2 if your lass wins. Shaking his head in bewilderment, Cannerid set up a fair fight between Jill and Praed, a beefy man who was the best brawler in the warband. Praed was grinning at the easy fight ahead of him as he handed his sword belt over to Cannerid. By then, every man in the dun was crowded round the contest ground. Rodri noticed Adern watching in horrified alarm, and the 2 men of the Westfolk who were making wagers on Jill against any man who'd take them on. Very well then, Cannerid said, stepping clear. It's on. Jill and Prague began to circle each other, hands raised and ready. Prague charged, swinging confidently, only to find Jill dodging in from the side. She grabbed his wrist as he punched and dropped to one knee, and somehow, just like Dwemer, the 200-pound Prague flew through the air and landed with a grunt amid the weeds. Still game, he scrambled back up, but this time he moved in cautiously. They feigned and dodged. Prague swung in low from the side. Jill leapt straight up and kicked him in the stomach and twisted down like a dancing girl. Gasping, Prague doubled over, then forced himself upright. Jill danced in and clipped him nearly and precisely on the chin. With a sigh, Prague closed his eyes and fell forward on the ground. The Westfolk yelled in triumph, and Cullen laughed softly under his breath, but the warband was utterly silent, staring at Jill in disbelief and sideways at Rodri in shame. Jill set her hands on her hips and glared at them. "Anyone else?" "Jill enough," Cullen called out. "You've made your cursed point, and I'd have to ride with them." "True spoken," Rodri said, stepping forward. "All right, men, go pour water over your sleeping comrade there, and don't feel shame on my account. I've just lost a good bit of silver myself." Still, they must have felt dishonored at the hands of a lass, because they frankly fled, stopping only long enough to scoop up Praed and carry him away. With the Westfolk trailing after to make sure they collected their coppers, Rodri made Jill a bow. "And where did you learn to fight like that?" "Da taught me somewhat, my lord, and I figured the rest out for myself." Jill wiped the sweat off her face onto her sleeve like a man, but still Rodri's heart skipped a beat. He'd never seen a lass like her, and she was lovely, oh so lovely. Then he realized that Cullen was watching him with a grim, paternal suspicion. "I'll get those coins out of my saddlebags for you, and you'd best keep your hellcat here away from the warband for a while." "I will, my lord, have no fear of that." As Rodri hurried away, he was cursing himself for an utter fool. He knew that he should put his common-born lass and the dangerous father out of his mind for good, but he also knew that for some bizarre reason he was falling in love again. That night, Lord Sliggin's army camped at the base of the stream that would eventually lead them to Rodri. The men gathered in little groups, their campfires like flowers of light out in the dark, wild meadow. As Nevin wandered through the camp, he came across a man he knew, Sandry, who rode for Lord Sliggin. A year ago, Nevin had pulled a bad tooth for him and cured the infection, and apparently Sandry remembered it kindly. "It's Nevin. Here, sit down at our fire, good sir. This is Arkad and Yevir. Lads, this is the best Erdman who ever rode the kingdom." All these names have Y's in them. It's crazy. Satyr's two comrades greeted Nevin with small smiles and nods of their heads. "I was cursed glad when I saw you in the train," Sandir said. "I'd rather have you along than our Lord Surgeon any day." "Oh, he's a good man. He just doesn't know teeth the way I do." "Maybe so." Sandir rubbed his jaw at the memory of the long-gone abscess. "But let's hope that none of us need your cures after a scrap." "Oh, here," Arkin said with a twisted grin. "I don't suppose you have any herbs to protect a man against Dwemer." All three laughed uneasily. "Well now, there aren't any herbs like that," Nevin said. "I take it you all believe the rumors going around?" "Doesn't every man in the army?" Sadard went on. "But it's not just wild talk. A couple of us had ridden to Corbin's Dun with messages and such like. I've talked to men who saw this Laudeling do things." "Do things? I saw this myself," Yevir broke in, and his broad face was pale. "Back in the spring it was, when our Lord was trying to talk Corbin out of rebelling. Lord Sliggin sent me to Brudlin with messages, and Corbin treated me well enough, giving me dinner with his men. So there were these big long logs laid in fresh on the honor hearth, and Laudelin come down with Corbin. I swear it, good sir, I saw Laudelin snap his fingers like, and flames sprang up all over the logs, and they were big logs, no kindling or such like." And then one of Lord Olded's men went to Brutalin too. Sandir looked up the Sandir took up the tale. He walks in and Corbin says, "Well, Laudelin told me you were coming. The men in his warband swear he knows everything that goes on for miles and miles." "It makes you wonder what else he can do," Ackred said. "Here, Nevin, if you know herbcraft, you must know bones and muscles and such like. Do you think a Dweeberman can turn someone into a frog?" "I don't," Nevin said firmly. "That's not but a silly bard's fancy. Now here, think. All those tales that say the frogs are just ordinary frogs, right? Well, if someone did get turned into a frog, it would have to be a huge one. You can't just go shrinking a man's flesh down to nothing, but the tales never say a thing about frogs big enough to ride." All three laughed and relaxed at the jest. "Well and good then," Sadler said. "I pledge I'll die for my lord, and I don't give a fart of 2 coppers pig if it's Dwemer or a sword that kills me. But cursed if I like the idea of hopping around in a marsh the rest of my days." "The lasses you'd have," Arkid said mournfully, "all green and warty." Nevin joined the general laughter. Jests were the best weapon these men had against the fear preying upon them. Toward midnight, when the camp was asleep except for the night watch, Nevin sat over the dying coals of the fire to contact Addern. After their long years of friendship, all he had to do was think of Addern briefly before he saw the image of Addern's face building up and floating above the red glow. "There you are," Nevin thought to him. "Are you in a position to talk?" "I am," Addern thought in return. "The camp's asleep. I was just going to contact you, truly. Corbin's army is still camped where I saw it last. No doubt they're going to wait till we're out of the dun and then make a try at killing Rodri. Is Laudelane still with them?" "Ah, he is. Ye gods, my heart's half torn apart. What a dolt I was to train the lad." Nevin bit back the all too human temptation to say, "I told you so." Addern's image smiled sourly as if he knew perfectly well that Nevin was thinking it. "But I did," Addern went on, "and now his misbegottens are my responsibility. You don't have to tell me that twice. What comes now is ending the matter." "Just so. Do you still think he's merely insane?" "I do. If he'd truly gone over to the dark path and its foul ways, he'd be hiding himself, not flaunting his gifts and meddling at petty lords." "Now that's true spoken. Here, you know Laudelane better than I ever will. It seems clear that he stirred up the blasted rebellion. Why? Is he trying to escape being brought to justice for that murder he did? If so, his scheme won't work. It doesn't matter who Corbin's overlord is. Gorbert Rice will haul him into the Mallover as readily as Lovian would." "True spoken, and I've been puzzling himself over this very question." "What?" "True spoken, and I've been puzzling over him this very question. At first I thought he had some scheme of killing me, or at least the other 2 witnesses I'm bringing. But if that were true, why involve Rodri in half the Tyrann? It doesn't make any sense." "It doesn't, and I think we'd best find out just what he thinks he's up to." Addern laughed, a harsh mutter. "If we can, that's the crooks, my friend, if we can." After he finished talking with Addern, Nevin sat up brooding for a long time, hoping that Addern was right about Laudelane only being mad. Truly, the lad had been unstable from the beginning. Studying Dwemer demands a perfectly stable mind, a core of simple common sense, in fact, because the forces that the Dwemer invokes can tear an unstable mind to pieces, leaving it prey to delusions and fantasies. Laudelane had never had an iron in his soul, only the malleable silver of a raw psychic talent that should have been suppressed, not encouraged. At least, if Addern was right, Laudelane was only misusing his Dwemer and not immersing himself in the strange, unclean things. Just as every light casts a shadow, so does the dark dreamer exist. The men who study it, and they never open their foul ranks to women, just after are just after power above all else, and hoard it like misers, never helping but only harming other souls. They grub around the dark places of the inner lands for peculiar magics and keep themselves alive unnaturally by feeding on the vitality of spirits and living people alike. Nevin was sworn to destroy such as them whenever he found them, and they knew it, and he hid from them. Scattered over the wild meadow, the army of Lord Corbin and his allies lay asleep under the starry sky. Sure-footed in the dark, Laudelin picked his way through the camp and out with the muttered word to one of the guards. The stink of so many unwashed humans was making him feel ill, and he walked a good long ways away from the camp before he flung himself down in the grass to rest. He was tired. He was always tired these days. Yet when the night came, he could not sleep. He pressed both hands against his forehead and tried to steady himself. The despised smell that he left behind him seemed to cling to his body and clothes. Suddenly he saw the smell, a thick gray cloud of smoke swirling around him in some unfelt wind. It was only a vision, an illusion, but he had to fight to banish it. Many visions came to him unbidden these days, just odd little things, voices half heard, things half seen, and always he could understand the cause, but still they were terrifying, because he knew that they should never have come at all. A Dwemer man works long years to open his mind to the inner lands, but at the same time he has to close his mind at will to draw the veil between himself and the unseen things. No matter how hard Laudelin tried to close that veil, things slipped through. When he looked up at the stars, they were dancing and leaping and sending long points of light like reflections off the polished blade. Hastily he looked away, but creatures seemed to be crawling through the grass like little weasels sniffing him out. He flung up one hand and made the banishing sigils in the air. When he looked at the weasel things were gone and stars steady, with a sigh that was a half groan, he flung himself face down to lie full length in the grass. The broken light from the stars seemed to dance in his mind, dazzling him. He summoned up the image of darkness, a soft, warm darkness like sleep, and let the image suffuse his mind until at last it seemed to him that he stood inside the warm, comforting dark, safe at last. He stumbled upon the trick of the summoning a dark some months before. It was the only way he could get any rest. Now it came to him easily, swiftly, every time he called it, as if it came of its own will. Yet even wrapped in dark, he could not sleep. His hatred was there in the blackness with him, the hatred he bore toward the stinking human beings he was forced to use as allies, and even more, the hatred he bore towards Elsion Lacker. I don't know who that is. It seemed he heard his hatred talking to him in a child's voice, until that voice became his own. Then he'd been practically an outcast in the elven camps, and all because his father was a wretched human being. Oh, everyone had been kind to him. That was the worst wound of all, the galling way that everyone had ever so kind, as if he were a half-wit who needed tender care. They were smug, the Elsion Lacar, so smug, secure in knowing that they'd lived for 4, maybe even 500 years, while as for him, well, how did he, a half-breed, live anyway? Oh, I think the Elsion Lacar is what the elves call themselves. Okay. No one truly knew at the moment. He might look in a mirror and see the beginnings of that inevitable human corruption into death that men called old age. He hated them all, men and elves alike. The hatred burned so bright that it threatened to wipe the darkness away. Laudelin steadied himself at the thought only of the dark. Let it soothe and blanket him. Voices came out of the darkness as they usually did, comforting him, agreeing with him that he'd be ill-used, promising him that he would get his revenge on the Elsion, Lakar, and the Elded men both. Laudelin the Mighty, the voices said, master of the powers of the air. No man can touch you, no man can best you, not you, Laudelin the Mighty. It's true, he answered in his mind. I shall have vengeance. Splendid vengeance for all these dogs that made you suffer. One familiar voice was soft and smooth and perfumy oil. Remember, slay Rodri Mailweed, and all the vengeance you have ever sought will be yours. Rodri must die. Remember, remember. I remember, and I swear to you I will. He heard the ripple of a satisfied laughter, and then the darkness turned thick and warm, and at last he could sleep. That's it for tonight. Thanks for watching. Talk to you later. Bye.